Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I am here with Carl Forehand, and we have an amazing guest today, and I cannot wait to talk to Jennifer Knapp. And Jennifer is a Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter, author, speaker, and advocate, known for her musical talents and commitment to social issues. With a rich history spanning over 2 decades, Jennifer has left an indelible mark on the music industry. Her career includes the remarkable achievements of selling over 1 million albums with her first 3 releases: the gold-certified Kansas, which was in 1998, Lay It Down, year 2000, and The Way I Am, 2001. Alongside this commercial success, Knapp has been honored with 4 Dove Awards and garnered 2 Grammy nominations. Hailing from Kansas, Jennifer's musical journey has taken her across the globe, sharing stages with renowned artists like Jars of Clay and gracing this prestigious Lilith Fair Tour in 1999 and 2010. Her artistry has been lauded for its poignant exploration of the human experience intertwined with themes of spirituality. Despite reaching the pinnacle of her career, Jennifer embarked on a transformative hiatus in 2002, only to return 7 years later with a renewed sense of purpose and passion for music. Her comeback album, Letting Go, debuted at number 73 on the Billboard Hot 200 chart, marking a triumphant return to the spotlight. In addition to her musical endeavors, Knapp is a trailblazer in advocacy, notably becoming the first major artist in the Christian music realm to openly discuss LGBTQ+ identity. This courageous stance sparked national dialogue and led to appearances on influential platforms like Larry King Live and the TEDx stage. In 2012, she founded the nonprofit organization Inside Out Faith, dedicated to advocating for LGBTQ+ rights within faith communities. Continuing to evolve as an artist and activist, Knapp recently completed a master's degree in theological studies at Vanderbilt Divinity School, further solidifying her commitment to advancing social justice through music and discourse. Jennifer Knapp's multifaceted talents and unwavering dedication to advocacy make her a true Renaissance woman, inspiring audiences worldwide with her music and message of inclusivity and acceptance. Welcome so much to the Desert Sanctuary podcast, Jennifer. I have to tell you that I have been a longtime fan of your music, so we're so grateful that you could join us here today.
Well, it's my pleasure. And after that long introduction, I feel like I should have grabbed another cup of tea. I need some more caffeine. Like, that's a lot of work.
I only messed up twice, which is kind of a record for me because usually I kind of stumble over my words a lot more, but it flowed really, really nicely. So whoever wrote that, well done.
Yeah. I was having to wow. Yeah. I was like, did you write that? But I think that's an in-house bio that I think I remember who wrote that. But yeah, for sure. If you only messed up twice inside of reading it, think about how many times in living it I messed up in between. So it's all good.
We told your tour manager we'll make this easy on you because it'd be an organic discussion. Then we had 20 minutes of problems getting technical difficulties getting started up here, but we're glad that you're here.
Mm-hmm. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I won't make it easy on you though. How about that?
That sounds fair.
That sounds like Laura a little bit. So we believe that stories are sacred. We think they're important, and we over the past several years, about 325 people have told us their story, and we just count that as a privilege to be able to hear their stories. And sometimes that's healthy and healing for them. Sometimes it teaches us. And so if you don't mind, we didn't give you any advance warning on any questions or anything like that, but
I love it.
We're sure that you're a pro and you can handle it. 2002, but maybe kind of started 2002. That was kind of a turning point, right?
Yeah, well, that's the year that I officially walked away from forever away from contemporary Christian music. So I really thought at the time, and I anticipated at the time that I was walking away from professional music in the spotlight, and for better or for worse, But yeah, one of the images that's really strong in my mind about the last time I think the last time I did a show, it was like September of 2002, and I just really visually remember just kind of putting my guitars in the case, and which is not something I typically do when I'm on the road and touring with a band. I usually have a guitar tech that does that, but I went over and I did it myself and packed them all up, just going, that's the last time. Because, I mean, at that point I was quite disillusioned in my kind of, I think looking back, and especially where we are now with a lot of people kind of really taking on board the Christian kind of deconstruction and this kind of generalized push of, and this important push, I think, that a lot of us are seeing about the responsibility that we have in having autonomy in and around our own faith experience, that we're not just, the lambs to be told what to do by our pastoral or, our leadership and authority, that it is actually a very interactive faith space that we have. And kind of going back to that space, I was kind of definitely pushing in that and quite frustrated with where we were heading. And this kind of advocacy that I look back to the history of my work, particularly inside of faith spaces, I've kind of always been advocating for this fully, not fully autonomous, but the sense of self that we bring to the thing, that it's not just, an invitation we've been authorized to be able to participate in, but we are all, each one of us, adding to the fabric of this story. We all have a part to play. We all have incredible significance and importance. And I think that was part, just one of many, but part of kind of like the disillusionment and frustration. I was getting to a point where I didn't really feel like I didn't know for sure what I was breaking and what I wasn't. I didn't even have my own life and my own personal life. I hadn't taken time for myself in like a very long time in the touring that I'd been doing inside of that. So, a lot of those things just kind of came to a head in 2002. Yeah. And, part of that exchange was particularly because I was on in the hamster wheel and on the treadmill. A lot of people were telling me at the time, you get off of this hamster wheel and there's no guarantee that you'll go back on. Particularly with some of the private conversations that I was having, and that I'd been having over the year or two prior to my leaving. A lot of people were saying, well, if I was going to go and entertain or kind of push back against some of these things, or like if I was everyone told me that I was essentially quitting. So if you're going to quit, there's no guarantee that you're going to ever come back. But that was kind of the way that my decision to take a significant amount of time off just kind of ended up kind of evolving or getting to this point of you have to quit. And just kind of part of the professional thoughts of people going, yeah, if you take any significant time off, you might as well, say that you're pushing the eject button. But I think also in my own sense of self, I had to kind of acknowledge that was quite the possibility. And that was actually quite the most liberating decision. Like the idea that I was actually never going to have to do this again if I didn't choose to, was definitely a decision that I made at the time.
Yeah. So that industrial machine of evangelical Christianity is a real thing, right? And
I think there's a point in that, in terms of like where we often talk about the vocational and the full on 24-hour day, 7 days a week evangelical experience. Like, if I think of maybe a scripture reference or something like, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than men. Like I remember that scripture, particularly early in my discipleship and my coming into evangelical Christianity, how often and how much pressure there was put on and in kind of aligning how serious I was about my faith would be judged or taken as by how much time I spent being visibly a person of that faith. I think we put a lot of pressure on even like the most, I think of all of my peers at the time when I was in college. A lot of us grew up to have some kind of leadership or some kind of vocation within spiritual community, some kind of artifact that represents how seriously we take our faith. The translation of that is we always have to be doing, creating, producing in order to kind of give this evidence of how serious we are about our faith. So if you're not doing something actively, if you're not in a nonprofit, if you're not making the world a better place, if you're not raising, support or finance, if you're not doing missions or if you're not doing something inside of that, even if it's voluntary, even if, you're an accountant, as a trade or as a skill, but you're not doing something actively within your community, and that there's somehow like a judgment against how seriously you take your faith. Because at the end of the day, if you're not if you're not doing something that other people can go, oh, that is inherently Christian, that is utterly fueled by your love of Jesus, then we kind of question that. And I go back to my experience and I was kind of going, oh, well, if I don't play any music anymore, I'm probably not a Christian. if I'm not doing these things anymore, I was, for me taking a big long break and saying I didn't want to engage in that vocational enterprise anymore. I couldn't do it, or at the very least needed to take what turned out to be a very long amount of time off. It was one of those things that really disrupts your sense of identity, upsets your sense of purpose, and even oftentimes your sense of your own seriousness or your dedication to the discipline of your own faith, which I think I don't think those things are unimportant. I think they're significant, and the extremes that we feel that in, and the paradigm shifts that we experience when we're doing and not doing definitely matter. But I think that often shadows over like just the quiet contemplative experience that we should have in like I guess in our private temples, right? In our own private spaces. Yeah. And instead of kind of judging it by the output and the production of the work, kind of writing off the things that people don't see, the quiet time, the quietness, just the inner contemplation and the inner experience that we have inside of our spiritual life. I think we tend to write that off way too easily, when I would do quite the opposite. And I think that is the groundwork for all of the other things. And so, we can get on into that. Stuff. I could get into that soapbox quite easily.
Oh yeah. So the mystics, there's mystics in every faith, I think, and outside of, organized faith. But mystics say, I know because I experienced. I had these experiences. Belief says, I assume that this is right. And of course, then, like you said, don't just be hearers of the word, be doers and do. And when I wrote my book, Being, it was all about that. And I'd been a pastor for 20 years. And say, this seems more like the real stuff that I'm doing now than all that busy work I was doing before.
Yeah, right? I absolutely adore the point you make of, in air quotes, knowing, or italicized knowing. I think, I think about like Harvey Cox actually a lot. He wrote a book called The Future of Faith. And one of his principal setups of that book was talking about making the distinction between belief and faith. And like belief is something that we oftentimes, like when we talk about knowing and we get into this thing of belief and faith and knowing and what we do and don't know, oftentimes we confuse knowing, we confuse like the metaphysical knowing of ourselves and fact. And there's sometimes really hard to kind of for us to from within ourselves describe the things that we suspect and we are gravitating toward getting to the space where we say, I know. And like that knowing is, it is kind of a mystical thing. It's an internal, personal, and even psychological knowing, or a sense of self and a sense of being, and us to be able to know. And in a lot of ways, sidebar, in a lot of ways, we kind of get to quote unquote know God in that way, instead of like it's a voice that you have a kinship with and you've spent time in that space spiritually, kind of getting to that volume of knowing. And it's one of those weird things that I think has been particularly advantageous actually when we've started to include LGBTQ plus voices into our space, because LGBTQ people have a very unique, not in our language, and in our experiences, how do you know that you're gay? Like how do you know that you're, in the wrong physical body? Like these levels of knowing are things that we know not because somebody else gets to say or dictate them to us. There are things that we know because we spent so much of our being, dedicated to this self-discovery, this internal knowing of ourselves. And that same discipline is not just, that same kind of discipline of kind of seeking knowledge about our own internal being is not dissimilar. It's the same kind of action and time and dedication it takes in a spiritual getting to know God. I mean, that takes a lot of kind of, like it is sort of mystical, but in a lot of ways it's part of what we do as human beings. Get into this, we try to get into this zone of quote unquote knowing. So I love that. This is one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the last 10 years about the rise of hearing LGBTQ voices and experiences, because I think that can shed some light to some other folks that we sometimes call into question that inner work, and that things that, like oftentimes, and I bring up Harvey Cox and the difference between like belief and faith, because we happen to know our inner voice, right? We get to know and we're familiarized with our inner voice. And then somebody external to us says, prove to me the knowledge that you have. Prove to me what you know, because I don't know how you can say this about yourself. And it's kind of ironic because no one's inside of you. No one else has the ultimate authority to fact check the knowing that you have on yourself, the knowing that you have of yourself. There's sometimes these kind of the kind of more ethereal or esoteric kind of things that kind of float around out there that sometimes get pushed and challenged up against other people's space. And even the knowledge of who I am, I still test that out in the world, right? Like I might say, for example, I'm a seer. As a creative person, one of my roles in the world is to kind of look at the world around me and take it in and absorb it and feel it and emotionally kind of see that and then translate that out. I know that I do that. I know that I want to do that, and I know it's natural to me, like that kind of knowing. If I don't know that I'm good at that, if I don't know that that's a skill, or I don't know that this is something that I'm designed or created to do, if that's the language I might use, then I might be missing out on what my skill set is. So there are ways of that knowing that become really important for us to spend time in us. But, kind of if we want to switch that to a faith-based kind of thought, like we have the opportunity to get to know the body that we inhabit, and, like you guys were talking about, our sacred story. What is our sacred story, and what is our knowing inside of that? So, but I love that thing, because I love that kind of notion, because it really does ask us to challenge or to balance our life and our living and our spirituality, not with just some of the facts or the history that we can prove or show that are like material and tangible. That's something that you can put on a timeline. There is another line there that is deeply spiritual. It is of our faith. And it's in that zone that, particularly as a creator, I'm drawn to, because they're hard to materialize and manifest and paint a picture of, because they're so hard for us to see, but they're still very real.
All of that language that you're using is what I keep trying to ask people. And I'm a big fan of Bob Dylan. I'm also a fan of Nora Jones, who reminds me a lot of you. I hope that's a compliment. But songwriters, poets, prophets, mystics, a lot of times they're in that same space that they're taking in what they intuitively experience as truth. They experience that in the world, and like you said, then you try to translate it, and it's hard. It's very, very, very hard, right? To communicate that, and I think that's where singers and songwriters come from. At least the ones that are authentic and genuine, and not just throwing a few country words around and mixing it into a word salad song, but genuine, deep folk singers and people like you do that very well. Do you relate to that at all, or fix my errors?
No, well, statement? I appreciate that. But I would say, like, I kind of keyed into when you said, it's very hard to do this. It's very hard to kind of connect these lines between, which I made a note. I'm going to explore that later. Like what is truth and knowing, because at some point when we get to know ourselves, that is a truth. Right. Mm-hmm. But the difficulty of that, in the creation of it, or the difficulties that sometimes people appreciate about our artistic or creative community, to be able to express these things that we see and that we know. Right. I would say, I don't know. When you said hard, I went, well, yeah, it's hard, but no, it's not hard. Like, it's not hard for me, but at the same time, it is hard. Like, it is challenging. It is. So that when I kind of think about that, I kind of go, no, it is an investment of our time. And regardless of what, and I'm going to put this in this space because I think sometimes we put creativity into a category of hard that kind of gets us off the hook of doing the work that we all have to kind of do. Like, it is very difficult if we don't figure out some way in our own lives to what is going to be our process of how we develop our own knowing. Like, some people are going to be mystics. I was talking about this actually inside of a group that I meet with inside of my Patreon group, and we were talking about how in the 90s, early 2000s, like, everybody was talking about quiet time. So there's this idea that you kind of mandatorily have to set aside at least an hour a day, right, to read the word and pray, and it's kind of this scripted kind of thing. But as I've kind of traveled through this, I kind of go, well, not everybody's an academic. Not everybody's, like, drawn to or energized by theology. It's, that's a work and it's a kind of discipline. But it's all to say that I think sometimes we look at the way other people do particular things, or bring us insight and share with us the wisdom and give us a view or a glimpse of our spiritual lives and processes. Some people do that through song. Some people do that through art. Some people do that through writing books and being academic. Other people just do it by driving a truck, down the road and being able to tell the story. At some point in time, we are all actively creating, building lives with which we share the wisdom of our experience. And the ways that we come by that knowing tend to be widely unique and diverse in a lot of different ways. The hard part of it is understanding and knowing what process that it is that will allow us to kind of give an insight into our own experience. To, what is, some people are going to be very meditative and prayerful people, right? Like centered prayer kind of, they'll do that every day more regularly than yoga. My partner's a big yogi. Like, I hate stretching. I won't take the time to do it, but I read and I play my guitar, and then I realize that the reading and the playing of the guitar kind of, for me, is this thing that kind of develops it. Like, I wouldn't know the first thing about how to begin to develop my life as like a seer of the world. I never really saw myself that way in my early 20s. I'm just, pooping out songs and writing kind of about my experience. But I didn't realize over the course of time, like, I got to know me, and I kind of got to know, oh, this is kind of uniquely a thing. So I'm going to flip all the way back around and say, what is hard, I think, sometimes to figure out what our own path is to knowing, and the commitment that we have to kind of discovering how we will develop that knowing, what our particular wisdom we can figure out will be helpful for us to be, you have to figure out what wisdom lives inside you. And that's not an easy thing to do. You have to spend time in developing your own life in that way. But you also have to, once we kind of figure out, oh, I am a pretty good source of wisdom. Like, what is the thing that I can share and contribute to my community that I can bring? Those things take a lot of time to develop. But I think sometimes we look at other people and we go, oh, that's hard. I don't know how to draw. Like everybody who's an artist still spends time developing their craft. I'm a guitar player. I still have to practice, but I start to see these kinds of signs to that. That's, to me, where it becomes challenging to the hard part. You start to see like the glimpse or the sunrise of something that it's not just inspirational all the time, and it's not just easy. You have to kind of start to see that a door starts opening up for you, but there is hard work and a choice to kind of develop that and practice that. I don't know if that makes sense, but and we all have the opportunity to do that. I think it's just the hard parts, like kind of figuring out, like, man, what is my thing? What am I into? Right. And how does that translate out to who I am in spiritual development? But I think one of the signs of that and who we are starts to show in what we offer and can contribute, maybe along the lines of, it may be an artifact, or it may be helping kind of add something, but in one way or another, it might not be as obvious as a song or a painting. We are still, even in our verbal and oral wisdom that we share and connect with one another, we are still painting, the proverbial or the metaphorical picture of what our life and our experience is like. And that's, kind of going back to where we were at. It's not just us going into a four walls of a church and thinking that completes the picture of the spiritual experience. It's all of us actually contributing to that space and doing some work, dare I say, alone, and in our own sense of knowing, figuring out what it is that we know so that we can share that knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love what you just said there so much, because my sister is a photographer. And I remember us having this conversation, because I was just like, you're a creative, and, just kind of putting her up on this pedestal, like, oh, what you do is just so amazing. You take these, and my son is too, or our son is a photographer too. He does more street photography, and just how beautiful all that is. And then comparing that to myself, my sister and I had this discussion, and I was just like, I wish I was as creative as you. She goes, you are a creative. She goes, you're a teacher. You have a place where you're going to make your mark, and you do make your mark as well. So I love what you shared there, because I think a lot of times we do that, and we think that, somebody else has all their the creativeness in this world, and we don't have that, but really tapping into what is it that I can share with this world as well.
Yeah. And I'm always kind of weirdly metaphysical too, because at a certain point, like it is to me, like, what do I know? And what is it? It seems to me sometimes like the things that we discover, right, in our world, or the things that we think that we learn in private or become aware of in private, we very rarely keep that way. Like, we want to make it real. We want somebody else to see and witness that with us as well. So, when we discover those things, we kind of bring them out into the rest of the world and go, do you see this too? We're looking for other people who can kind of affirm, dare I say, that knowledge and that truth, whether it's something within ourselves, or I think, maybe in our experience with the divine. And it's a really different mode of thinking, particularly when we often associate with creativity, or even like I said, the quiet time, that with this kind of like transactional thing, this idea that if we spend time doing, that we will get a product on the other side that makes us somehow visibly or materially wealthier. And I mean that in the literal sense, like a song that makes me money, a song that makes me popular, a song that makes, rather than a song that connects. or developing a ritual for something for us to do together, something that like enriches in not the monetary sense, but in the spiritual sense. It's a very interesting way, because I think we live in a world right now, right? Even with our social media, every time we take a photograph, I'm trying to take a photograph that's proving to you a fact and evidence of how beautiful I am, right? Instead of, let me take this photo so I can share with you an insight into the world of what I've seen. There are two different ways of kind of looking at that thing. And oftentimes we begin to judge it instead of actually taking the time to actually realize, like somebody who took a photograph, perhaps as an example. I think one of the things we love about amazing photographers is they give you an opportunity to see into a world that you didn't see yet until that photograph just stood still long enough for you to look through that, through that pain. So, but we all have an opportunity to bring that photograph, to bring that picture. It's just the challenge of actually becoming aware of where we are, giving ourselves the opportunity to share and to share in that. For those the things that we do know, they have to materialize in some way, in some form of communication and connection with another human being that helps us affirm what's not just something that we suspect that we know, but it helps it actually, dare I say, maybe evolve into a truth. It gets affirmed, which is, I'll swing that back to the LGBTQ community. Like, that's where it becomes so important, right? In those spaces, that the affirmation is the affirmation and the more that we've seen churches including LGBTQ stories, participation in worship, like the full being of queer folk inside of our spaces, has actually affirmed the truth that we have known for a very long time. It's just needed to live out in that connected space. So dare I say, and that's where it becomes like really important that we also be able to identify that other people in this process, the acceptance of that wisdom, the willingness for us to see it also becomes part of that exchange.
Yeah. What stood out when before Laura asked her question, you mentioned that struggle it seems that everybody has when they come out of evangelical Christianity or religion in general or whatever. They have kind of a PTSD, and it's the PTSD is, who am I? What's my place, is the way I think you said it. But authenticity, we have a little tagline. We say, be who you are, authentic, and be where you are, presence, and then be at peace. So, but over and over and over again, people have said to us, going through deconstruction, religious trauma, whatever they're coming out of, one of the first pieces of work to do is, who am I? And then living authentically. I think you can tell it in a songwriter, preacher, whatever, a writer. That's my thing, that I express through writing. But first of all, you need to know who you are, and then live that way out of that, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I appreciate the paradigm shift too. Like, am I a Christian anymore? is one that I have asked myself. I probably do that. Maybe, I don't really spend a lot of energy on it more because I don't really care, to be honest. Like, it's not a thing that I worry about. In that identity sense, right? But it is a big paradigm shift, particularly if you've been living in that community, and the value of that being connected to that community, and the kind of a sense of ourself is that God sees me, is somehow bound to this idea of whether or not you qualify as a Christian. But qualifying as a Christian is a wildly different experience than having a Christian experience. And the difference of that is, like, it doesn't surprise me. Like, when somebody says you're not this anymore, and all you've spent is all your time saying, I am this. And like, for me, like, I kind of, let me try and make it tangible in some way. I remember maybe 15 years ago or so, when I was kind of just toying with what public conversation I may or may not have in and around my faith. I realized at a certain point, like a friend of mine, in all of my talking and just, hanging out with friends and just kind of parsing through this, when my friend goes, well, you're not evangelical. And when they said that, it terrified me for a second. I didn't have, culturally, I was like, great. But theologically, in the rules of what made, I don't know, if one looked at a rule or a law that said what is good Christian belief, to evangelicalism going off the table for me it really freaked me out, because I'm like, I was talking about I am not evangelical in the sense that I don't necessarily, and this is a theological point, I do not subscribe to, you have to accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. This context of evangelical, and that's a tenet, right, of people who are in the evangelical camp. You will go to hell unless you confess with your mouth that Jesus is the Son of God. Mm-hmm. I don't ascribe to that belief, but that's okay. It's just, it puts me over in this other camp of not evangelical. But that was a really terrifying moment, because everybody I'd known, to me, they were one and the same. The Christianity and evangelicalism were not, you couldn't separate them. And in order to participate, and I realized not every denomination's like that. There are a lot of other schools of Christian thought. That's all to say is I bound up all this stuff inside of the identity and put that ahead of the experience, the actual participation in this space. What is Jesus revealing? Or an easier way of putting it, Henry Nouwen, I'm kind of going through a lot of Henry Nouwen right now. And when he's talking about the movements of faith spiritual movements of faith that we are going through, he talks about the motivation being that we would come to live in the Spirit of Christ. But what does it mean to live in the Spirit? And my argument is it's not just this supernatural thing that washes over you and then takes over our body. I can live in the spirit of Carl Forehand if I wish to, but I have to know Carl. I have to know Laura in some way. I've spent time with you in some way, or I know your lives, or have been in and around you to know that, I don't know if you're into donuts, but maybe you like to make donuts, whatever. But I might do something in the spirit of you, or, somebody who can play a song in the spirit of Jen Knapp, playing it for a room that's a gift or something. You would only know that because you spend time with it. That's all to say is that we somehow think the identity of that is more important than what our faith tradition can tell us in what it means to live in the spirit of. To get to know what Jesus is doing. Reading isn't about I have a problem with just turning the Bible into this list of authorities and things that we should do or not do or test our living against. Rather than looking at it as an opportunity for us to see the wisdom of people who've gone before us, to give us an insight as to what spiritual world we are living in. Christianity is a tradition that is about the energy of that spirit. And as we get to know it, the identity that I have inside of what you call me is less important to me. But what is offensive to me is that when I'm unsettled of knowing who I am. I know now who I am in that space. What it's called, right. Most people think, the tradition that I play in my mother tongue is Christianity. But is Christianity me? Am I defined by that overlaying?
Where you came from, or is it you?
Or is it something I participate in? Is it, is it a context of which is a source of wisdom, a source of community, an external thing? It is very much an external thing. What I do and how I participate, that begins to color my life. And I think that flips that. So when we're struggling with kind of these issues, my point is we're oftentimes, I think, trying to fit ourselves or become identifiable by some other external measure, rather than seeing these external things outside of us and understanding that they are offerings toward us. Christianity is a way for us to get get knowing. It is a process for which can teach us or guide us or be a pool of wisdom, a resource of wisdom for us to be able to engage. Rather than like in a creative sense, we are not blank pages. You don't have to reinvent this. There are a lot of us who've been going through this process, but it can be terrifying because it is a flip of the way that we often been taught. We've been trying to like craft ourselves into representative Christians rather than allowing Christianity to gift us with an experience. And the difference in that living for me was a huge shift. But actually one of the most rewarding shifts I think I've ever had. Like I was quite surprised that I would still participate with Christianity because I rejected the other. I didn't want to live into and become a conformist. I didn't want to be religious in that sense. And I think that's kind of one of our struggles is we're kind of transactionally trying to mold ourselves into something rather than the understanding and unleashing who we were created to be. That's a wild difference between those two things.
So good. There's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. And we've been told, and I think by psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, and so on, that they kind of agree that we as humans have a deep need for connection, right? And some people use that to say, well, then that's why we need to go to church, but there's also toxicity of religion in some cases. How does music play in that discussion? Because I'll tell you why I asked this. My friend said, well, sometimes music in a religious setting is used as manipulation.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And then, but music can also be a powerful connector. Yeah.
No,
so can you expand on that?
Well, I mean, I think sometimes, and it helps me, a friend of mine, Shauna Bowman, we have a lot of conversations together, and institutional church is a word that they will often use with me because I get uncomfortable with church. This idea that kind of going to your base point of our interdependency, like we cannot live in isolation. Like part of our knowing and our truth seeking in ourselves and even in our spiritual experience has to be affirmed by reality, by going outside of a black room, black little box that we live inside of alone. We need a mirror to the world. We need to see other people like us. We need to connect. We need to love and be loved. I mean, these things are really important. And so I hate like that for me to say and realize like, oh yeah, no problem. No worries. And music has taught me that, right? Like I thought I could live alone. I'm a lone wolf. I'm an introvert. I loved it. COVID was a great experience for me. Yeah. Until it wasn't anymore, right? A song, like even a song is not its fully complete self until it goes out and it's heard. It's a song is almost like a being, right? Somebody needs to hear it for it to be real. Like I can play it all by myself, but it doesn't come alive until other people live and share it. And we as entities are strangely the same thing. Couple that with church and the institutional comment. I've often been vexed by, I mean, there's no question. A lot of us are struggling, like whether we don't want to go to church because it doesn't look like us, because it's not welcoming, because it's not inviting, because there are institutional problems. There are acceptance or qualifying who gets to be in this room and who doesn't. There are a lot of things I think we could go on for hours, and many of us have, about what's been problematic about it. But on the other side is one problematic thing going, how do I make the circle's not complete until we start living and connecting with other people. Like the graft, our interconnectedness, our divine connection, our sacred connection. It's not just about you and the divine. Like you are a part of this greater organism, and it's a tragedy when we leave one person out because the organism's not complete without you. And I think the challenge for me sometimes, for me personally, I'll center myself in that, like going, something's going wrong then, right? If I'm not going to church. Like, okay, let's step back from that a second. That's an institutional argument. If I don't go to the church on the street corner at that address or to that denomination, there are a wide variety of other ways that we're connecting, where two or more are gathered. How are we grafting in? How are we connecting? And what does that mean in the world? So in one way, kind of even going back to the vocational thing, it's not just a job or a space that we go to. It is for me, it's a much bigger picture of how I'm connecting. I connect through music. It happens to be one of the ways that I connect. But I also realize that there are other, and this is where I get a B in I have to listen to my own rationale and logic. When I was in div school, like there's like one thing that challenged me the most in going in and coming out of that was the realization is like, oh shit, I can't get around this church thing. And what I mean by that is not the institutional part of it, but the connectedness to the community of people who know and understand and practice and care for this tradition. I cannot get around it. Like, this is my pool of wisdom. These are my people, not just, one people. I connect to a lot of other people, a lot of other interest groups, but I cannot sit here and say that I can divorce myself from that engagement. I can't take my wisdom out of it any more than I can say that I can't seek it. Like, I need that wisdom. So at some point in time, we have to figure out what does church mean to us? Like, what is that interconnectedness? Because it doesn't become a reality until we begin to see it in its gathering, whether it's two of us getting together.
Choose that? I'm sorry for interrupting you, but do we get to choose that? Or is there a right answer that we got to discover?
I mean, I'm an advocate for choosing to a degree. I mean, I say that with one little with an asterisk on that. I think there is something to be said by our mass gathering in these moments. This has happened. This is something that we end up doing at some point. I think maybe if I have a caveat, we sometimes imagine that institutionally, like big mega churches, right? And I sometimes think of church as like a bridge. Like, how many people can a bridge safely hold? How can you really know 10,000 people in your church? It's not possible. We have to know the community and the world around us. We have to build relationships and experiences that we can actually manage. It's not feasible that we actually have 300 really good friends. So the choosing part of it is kind of adjusting more. Like, we can go to big gatherings, but we still need to cultivate, perhaps over choose, I would say we need to actively cultivate, not just we spent some time talking about ourselves, but then others, a little bit like a friend zone, if you will, and even maybe a larger zone than that. Like, I'm out doing a lot, a lot of people know who I am. I'm engaged in a community. Like, in some ways, I'm engaged in a church that travels. Like, I'm in a church in Seattle at a show. It becomes kind of this sense of a church. We have gathered together and we have these kinds of things. So yes, some of it is of our choosing. It is customized to who we are, what our communities are, what our locales are, what our interests are, what our gifts are. But it's also sometimes we need to go to other places that service our ritual worship. I think it's important to have a sanctuary that we can see, what a sacred space is or what a temple is. But I think the adjustment I would have in that is like the mandatory requirement of it. But it does, the mandatory requirement, like, you're not a good Christian if you don't go to church on Sunday. But the challenge is if we want a meeting place that we go to with an organized group of people, here's the fact of it. Like, you and I both have to agree that we're going to meet up on a regular basis. And if we want that church or that institution or that place of ritual or that temple to be there, then we need to be able to care for that temple. So what does it mean to have these established places like a four wall or an institution is the really interesting thing that I think we're asking right now. Is like, yes, I can choose, but also in that choosing, if I choose against an institution, but then want to go to a place where I can reliably go back to, how is that institution maintained? And so it is a challenge for leadership inside of that space too, to reimagine like what that is. Is it a community garden that we're all taking for and caring for in some way? Or is it something that somebody owns and decides who gets to come in and come out? So I think these are the challenges. And to me, the cool and exciting part of a lot of us engaging on a deeper level, some of these realities, like what then is my church? What then do I mean by it? What do I want to be a part of? And what do, if I need a church, which I would say that I do, and I'm putting air quotes, if I need a pool of wisdom, a community of people that I know and I trust and I can rely on, how do I care for them? And how do I reliably find them in a place and at a time, and knowing commitment to this endeavor that I'm at, and how does that become recognizable are really things that I think are challenging what we have traditionally thought about the institutions and our meeting places.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've talked to your friend Derek Webb and Flamey Grant. We also talked to someone named Brady Harden the other day from the Life After podcast. And Laura and I just went to our first Pride ever. On Saturday, we drove about an hour to Omaha, and we were asking. I think it was Brady that we asked, and he said, "We said, how do I be how can we be better allies to the queer community?" And he said, "Don't be like this." And then we saw it in person at Pride. He said, don't, and we're not clergy anymore, but don't wear your clergy collar and promote your thing, your business. Be there and celebrate with people who are celebrating. Celebrate with them.
Yeah, fantastic advice. Yeah.
And Derek even talked about when he did the podcast, the name of that podcast that he did when he started his deconstruction. What was it called? Me on the spot. I know. Now. What is it called?
Because I was just thinking of Brady's.
But Derek Webb's podcast lasted a couple of 3 years anyway. And he said, and Laura was really influenced by it, even though we can't remember the name of it right now.
I'm going to look it up though.
But what he said was, even with all the good intentions and the pureness of this podcast and helping people express their grief, it's something about grief.
The airing of grief.
The airing of grief.
Oh yeah, that's right.
People were able to air their grief. But he said, even that quickly became this patriarchal white male, centered thing that started to look more and more like an institution. It kind of pulled down that DNA, and those are my concerns about progressive Christianity. Is being affirming is very important. It's one of the key things to move forward, but it's not the only thing. There's still the institutional problems there, the tendency to become a patriarchy, still a business, and so on. And we don't want to spend all your time talking about religion.
What's interesting to me about that, though, when you put it in the framework of a podcast, I mean, it becomes cis white male because Derek is cis white male. Yeah. Like, that's not his, not a fault. Like, the things that we build up around become like, I think this kind of speaks to one of the importances of like, when you have more people talking, like obviously a podcast that's hosted by one person is going to start to be monolithic in its representation of that, right? It's going to default to looking a lot like Derek's ownership of this idea. But if that were like 4 or 5 or 6 other people involved in that conversation and it rotates it around, it has some diversity in it and it's kind of, a lot more fluid, then I think that's a great example of a church. Like that's one of the challenges every time we set up something static. It's just a challenge.
Right.
It's a challenge with me. Like I'm on the mic and talking the whole time. It sounds like I'm watching this little documentary right now and it's like 99% me. And I'm like, oh my God, like I don't want to watch 99% me. Like the story is bigger than that. We have to uncenter one individual from that spot. so I love the community garden kind of metaphor I've been carrying for so long about it is genuinely a challenge, and it's an unavoidable challenge. And anytime that we codify, anytime we try to organize anything, it comes with the risk. Like, organize something so we can repeat it, so we can find it, so we can practice it. The challenge of that is that it becomes codified, right? To be a Christian, you have to do these things. To be a Christian, you have to go to this place. But yet at the same time, we need to be able to, we need to have recognizable disciplines. We need to have a familiarity. We need to know, we need to get a knowledge of what's repeatable and functional and works. So the community garden is one that I kind of just keep going back to. Is like, I'm hungry and I need food. I want a fruitful place. And yet at the same time, I'm not always going to be able to attend to that garden. But I know that sometimes I will have a season where I can, maybe I'm really good at tomatoes. Oh my God, I just said tomato. In my household, it's always tomato. My Aussie side. When I start saying tomato, I know it's time for me to get back to Australia. But we have tomatoes, I'm really good at growing those, but we'll have a few people that are really good at that. But I also get corn. I benefit from the people who grow corn and the other people growing snap peas. And somebody doesn't have a green thumb. Somebody's kind of making sure that people come and water on schedule. And we noticed that Jen's been getting busier and the aphids are taking over the tomatoes. Jen, do you need some help in that? Maybe let's get another tomato person in here and you can take some time off. In order to maintain that garden, in a community garden in a sense, we all have to be giving into it and be willing to invest at certain times and in certain roles, the perpetuation of that. And, not all gardens will last. They'll be seasonal and they'll pop up other places, or we might need to find a different tribe, or, whatever. There's no easy answer to it. But I think that, like, for me, what I'm at least trying to offset, and this is kind of in the category of what you were saying, Carl, and in Brandon's talk about pride celebration and allyship, is that sometimes it's easier to be apophatic, which is to say what something is not, and to be aware of what its challenges that you persistently try and resist. So when we're creating our community garden, what we don't want is an overlord who gets to say who gets what corn, and that it becomes a burden to us. Try to figure out how we can communally try and do this. And it has shifts. It has seasons. It will fall. We'll have we'll have disagreements, and the garden will go to shit and be overtaken by weeds, but we're still hungry. And the point is, we have to keep trying this endeavor to continue to give it life and to feed it and to grow and find our communities, those unsettling things. But if you want to have allyship inside of that, it is not just about like celebrating the institutional side of it. It is a communal gathering of it. And so if you want to be an ally, for me, like that, this same kind of thing is, you don't have to host the thing, but you do have to get to know people. You have to be around. And if this is a pride celebration, this is a celebrating parade, don't advertise your church. But if your church, but at the same time, I go, maybe your church is celebrating. Maybe your whole church came out because half of your church is walking in the parade because, somebody from the church started their own float or something else like that. Or we've got a huge queer community. But that allyship, and those things began to show themselves in our relationships because we are connected. And we're connected because we're helping each other do something along that way that actually it emboldens our life and our celebrations. And sometimes it's not about you in that celebration. And sometimes it might be like, if that's apropos, I'm not necessarily against the caller, but like you're not there to knowing what we are and what we can be called for in that kind of moment is a bit of the discernment and a bit of the joy of what we have to offer in the making of other people's great flourishing lives. Sorry about that.
That's great. One church went beyond saying, look at our church. They said, look at our pastor. He had a big sign. He was right in the middle of the whole thing, and it said, this pastor loves you, which is a good sentiment maybe to say as you're getting to know somebody and to tell them that personally. But it was even more than come to our, this is our church, this is our pastor, and he's a great guy because he's an ally or whatever. But can we, the new album is called Kansas 25, right?
It is, yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So, Kansas 25, for those of you who are familiar with my career, my very first record was called Kansas. It was released in 1998. And I probably wouldn't have the life that I have today if it weren't for that record. And for sure, it was, with the very first national release record that I had. It was a Christian record as well. And so in 2023, that was the 25-year anniversary of the record. And I, for a few reasons. One, I think the history, the way that album has received and been kind of talked about in the history of contemporary Christian music and its time, particularly its prominence in the 90s and the impact that record made in the 90s. And with my coming out, there's definitely a shift in how people thought about that record. But also, I've changed a lot in the last 25 years. I'm a better guitar player. My theology's got, my participation in faith community has grown in a lot of ways, has I don't know, in some ways probably gotten wider and more significant in some ways, and yet has decentered around, I'm not necessarily a career Christian anymore, which is ironic. I'm spending this year talking about it. But Kansas 25 was a re-recording of that. It was an interesting experiment for me to kind of look at the last 25 years, both, in terms of spirituality of myself, of the people who have been listening to it, and still carrying that record, a celebration of where we've all been. There's a lot of deconstruction inside of it. There are people who've moved on. There's a Christian culture kind of commentary with it. But a lot has changed for a lot of us who've been in and around that particular recording project. And I just thought it'd be really fun to kind of see if, in going back and re-recording, if we would get a sense of the 25 years that we've all traveled, not just my own, as an artist inside of that, but really like communally. This record for me has been, I think, right at the top of the list on what Kansas is and what I would prefer to talk about it is not my own artistry, but actually a community of people. We're talking a lot about others, right? Mm-hmm. And our kind of interdependency in others. If it weren't for that community, my life would be wildly different. If it weren't for a song that had found the ears of so many other people, like I've become so much less as an individual, become actually so, to me, kind of boring and insignificant. You can put it, my life is like a bio. You can get it done in 2.5 minutes. But the larger and the richer story becomes really intriguing once you have an artifact to kind of look at that kind of sparks our memory, sparks our heart, and sounds differently to us in a way that we came to know it. So it's been really fantastic to kind of have this experiment. It's been wild.
That is very cool. I'll have to go listen to that. I know that a lot of your music that really touched me, like early on in the 90s, was a lot of that contemporary Christian music. So, I'm going to have to. Part of my deconstruction was I just could not listen to like music at all. So I'm slowly trying to get, back into that in a very careful way, because I don't want anything to be like, too triggering, but, one question.
No, I appreciate that. But because like for a lot of people who've talked about like this, like, what are we going to do next? Once we've kind of had, the light bulb's gone off, or we've seen that the emperor has no clothes, or whatever shift we're doing inside of our faith tradition, the artifacts of those, like whether it's what the inside of the church looks like, just as much as like going into a sanctuary or even pulling into the parking lot of a church or turning on a radio or seeing a Thomas Kincaid painting or something like that. What we audibly take in has a lot to do with, all of these kind of other things that we might otherwise take for granted can really spark us off. But I think it shows, one, the importance and the significance of having meaningful creative outlets and things that help us like we begin to see the material, we begin to see a representation of something that's inside of us that's so hard to see. And so when we see something on the outside of us that's connected to that, and that visual or that audible or that space, that liminal reference is offensive to us or threatening to us, it makes it, I can see why people don't listen to music anymore, don't go into a sanctuary, because it is threatening to our inner sanctuary. And we need to be able, the challenge is finding those places that align for us and safely align for us. So it's not a small thing. Like, I heard a long time ago, Bishop Gene Robinson was talking to a queer community of folks going, if church is a bad traumatized, the institutional four walls is a bad place for you to go as a queer person, it's not safe or, too triggering for you, then don't go. And for those of you who can, then by all means go. But, at some point in time, like, that's the thing, like, kind of going back to the conversation of choice. We need to be in the spaces where we are, ticking off the boxes of our spiritual connection, our collaboration, and our shared work, and our mirrored space with other people, are coming into our, being able to see our own existence because we know that we are out and living in the world. Those things are mandatory to our sense of knowing and consciousness, but being a little bit more flexible on how we imagine those are materialized, because sometimes, if those representations aren't healthy and well, they'll actually impinge on the other things that we're trying to achieve. We need to be able to find music, which is, as a musician, I kind of go, well, that's why I get kind of pissed off for people saying, oh, you can only listen to Christian music. I'm like, well, if I can't find any Christian music that's representing something that's on the list of my spiritual development, I don't care who it was written for or how it was written. I need to find something that speaks to that, because the other things are just pissing me off right now. So I need to hear the music in me. So I need to go find that place, and I will try and find the healthiest version of that actually feeds that, healthily waters and creates fruitfulness in us. So, yeah.
That's really good. And I think, I can 100% resonate with that. And I do, like, there was a point, many years ago that I was like, if I never listen to music again, that's fine. I will not be bothered by that. But I do feel myself healing in a lot of ways. And then when I do hear music, especially like you're talking about, music that is actually nourishing where I'm at right now, then that means something to me. Now, I don't want to listen to, the hymns of the church and things like that. Yeah. That's still really raw. But
I was just going to say that I had that experience with the songs on Kansas. I had like, after I left CCM and kind of was debating, like, just really conflicted about what and how engaged I was going to be with others in and around my own Christianity. Because I think the with others part was like the real challenging part, right? I could do everything that I wanted to do in private. Sure. I could be mad. I could disagree with the Bible. I could burn it, tear it up, read it, do whatever I wanted. Nobody would know the difference. And that life would be as engaging to me or as fruitful as I wanted it to be. But then what would I do when I left the room and I started to engage with others? Did I want to be an opponent of it? Did I want to find somebody who understood what I was going through? Right? Like, there's that part of it. That's all to say is that for a long time, I didn't feel comfortable playing my Christian stuff. I felt angry at it sometimes, inauthentic in other ways. There are songs that I disagree with what the language is. I wouldn't say something. I wouldn't write something like that. And I have to debate, like, do I want to sing it if I don't want to say it? If I don't carry that. And so it took a long time for me to kind of figure out what my relationship with some of these things were going to be. And for the most part, I'll say that I've found a way, and I think Kansas has been a really great example, because I've had a lot of people come back, when I go to shows, they've asked me through the years to play those songs because they mean something to them. Yeah. And that was part of my rehabilitation, actually, because initially I was like, no, screw you. I'm not playing any of that stuff. I don't want to. I'm uncomfortable. And I think that's a legitimate response for any of us to have. But I also realized that I was being inhospitable in that space. I was saying, I just said no, but I didn't have a reason why I was saying no. I was just scared. And so slowly but surely, like, that's, for me, that's not, I have a problem with, like, I got no problem. If you don't ever want to go back to church or you don't want to participate in Christianity anymore, I got no issue with you at all. I think that is a choice that any of us should be able to make. The challenge in those things is, like, are you making a choice out of fear? Are you cutting yourself off from something you actually want, need, desire, might be beneficial or fruit for you in some way? Like, I personally, like, even when I was, like, not doing music, I remember asking myself one day, I'm like, am I not playing because am I not playing because I don't want to play? Like, if I don't want to play, that's a perfectly acceptable answer. And my partner was asking me, my now wife was asking me, she's like, that's okay. If you don't ever want to play again, or you don't want to do all that work, that's fine. I'll stand by you. But you seem angry. You seem lost. You seem like you're missing a part of you. So I'm just going to put that out there. So, I didn't need to have to chew my arm off to get out of the trap, was a little bit of kind of the thing. And so you kind of have, but I also had to do a lot of work to really ask myself that hard question. So at the end of the day, when we're choosing not to do something, I'm all cool with that. It may not be where you need to be, but also ask yourself, where do you want to be? Like, what do you want to participate in? Might you participate in something that's not perfect? These are kind of, maybe this place isn't survivable for you, but maybe you're dairy intolerant, but you still need calcium in your diet. So you have to figure out what you're going to do. Or maybe you love dairy and you'll just suffer it, So it's a lot of kind of trying to figure out what the discernment process is for you and being honest. But the asterisk I would put on that is, just because something is difficult for us to reconcile, confusing or incongruent maybe sometimes, to not just write it off. Because people are like this too, right? Just because you don't understand LGBTQ people and maybe you don't subscribe to a belief, or somebody's taught you differently, to just write it off because you don't agree. But to, like, get into a space where your no is a no that is built on a knowledge. Your participation in something is because you're willing to be in it or you're willing to be out of it, but not accidental in whether you're participating in something. And if it's something that's essential to your development in your life or your health and your well-being, to be able to be willing to give yourself permission to acknowledge that thing inside of you, and to find places that will, help you complete the wholeness of your experience. I mean, I think maybe to be a little bit more, on point is, like, if in a spiritual life at some point in time, maybe we don't necessarily religiously want to be Christian or theologically be evangelical, but in some sense, if you have ever said, I am spiritual but not religious, I would still say to you at some point in all of what we're saying is that we still need a base or a tradition or a practice that we're invested in, that we repeat, that we develop in our own selves, but we often don't have to reinvent the wheel. Christianity is a tradition. There are denominations that have rules and sets of beliefs and codes and things, and all that. But in the wider picture of it, should you choose to participate, the second point of what we were talking about today is there's a connectedness with other people, with other sources of wisdom. I mean, you can teach me how to play guitar, But at a certain point in time, I might be curious about doing that, but somebody still needs to kind of teach me. I still from time to time look up chord references. I still get something from somebody else that somebody teaches me something about something that I've been doing for a long time. And I still practice. I still have to practice my own guitars. I have to repeat it and I have to do it again in order to kind of have it stay something that I'm, for lack of a better word, still good at. Like if I want to be good at doing a show this weekend, which I've got plenty, I need to play my songs. I need to know them. I need to, be able to recall them and be fluid with them. So it's, it may be one thing to say, no, I'm really kind of toying what I want to do in and around this Christian experience. But at some point in time, if you recognize inside of yourself that you're a person who wants to care for your spiritual self, then some kind of practice in understanding or reading about other religions or reading about maybe another tradition might speak to you better. I sometimes understand my own tradition by reading about other traditions. I've understood Christianity better by understanding Judaism better, by understanding Islam better, and the history of all of those three religions and the relationships to one another has actually, ironically, made me a little more gracious to my own experience. But at some point in time, it's not just us living in a bubble. We have to have something that we can practice if we want to get better, or if we want any kind of knowledge or knowing or repeatability in what we're doing, or even comfort in what we're doing. Like we have to be able to see it. So we have to be creative. We have to do something in and with it, and around it. And we have to connect with other human beings. So, I wish I could avoid those things, but they are things that in my lifetime have been really interesting to go, oh, wow, I am connected to other people. I'm reimagining perhaps what church does and doesn't look like for me. But the idea that I'm not connected anymore is a fantasy. Like I still, the work I do at home ends up whether it's a song or a spiritual conversation or theology or something like that. I might start that work at home. I do that consistently and invest in that work, but it also then ends up manifesting itself outwardly in one way or the other, whether it's a song or theology or something like that. So good luck to you guys if you can just, you think you can erase it out of you, but the things that are moving you. I mean, you're here probably listening to this podcast because, it's like Brokeback Mountain. I can't quit you. Like you can't quit yourself. Right. You can't quit the knowledge of you and the longing that you have, whether it's, some of you might be, horse buffs, or baseball fans. Just because you're not playing in Major League Baseball doesn't mean that you don't love going out and having a hit up on the weekend and going out and go to a batting cage if that's all you get. Like at some point in time, don't just say that you love something, but do what you love and spend time getting to know the thing that you love and why you love it.
Yeah. Do you feel that, I want to make sure that I word this right, because I struggle with the word heal, because I don't like to throw around the word that like the idea that we're broken. But do you feel like there's a place for us to have that internal healing? I guess I asked that because for me, I mean, I don't think I would be here now, saying what I can say about music, and as opposed to where I was 10 years ago saying, absolutely no way, I'm not stepping foot in a church and I'm not listening to music of any kind, really. I feel like I had to do some internal work. How important is that? It was that important to you?
Yeah.
And your growth and your journey?
Yeah. I mean, part of that, like the short answer is, I think reclaiming, just picking up my guitars and acknowledging that I loved playing, that I love music, regardless whether I did it as a job or whatever. Like music is so much a part of my life. I mean, I just sing and play all the time. And if I when I didn't have that in there, like there was, I just kind of like, for a while I didn't miss it. But when I started to kind of get my breath back, I mean, you talked about healing, right? I mean, after I got off the road for a couple of years and then I didn't have anything else to do with my time, and then I'd start to sing and then I'd start to sing and then I'd go, oh no, I can't do that because I don't have anything to sing. And the only things I had to sing were Christian songs, and it made me mad, right? So then I start shutting it down because I didn't contend with, like, I didn't think, oh, I need to write a new song. It took me so long to do that, and I had to work through that. Like, I didn't want to write a new song because if I write a new song, then I'll have to play it out for other people. And if I play it out for other people, then I might end up having a career, and I don't know if I want to be incoming. And like, just nuts.
Yeah.
Instead of just stopping, just stop and go, why am I not playing? Am I not playing, And at a certain point, I realized the true answer to that was I was choosing not to play rather than opening the door up. Like, what happens if I play? That's kind of a little bit of what I was talking about. But healing, I love it. I appreciate like your discomfort with the word healing, particularly from evangelical environments where we're always broken and God's always trying to make us better people, and that we're crap to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's the truth of it. Sometimes we really are wounded. Sometimes we really have broken a bone. Sometimes we really do need to rest and heal. We really do need healing. Right. That's a distinction from another side of spiritual work, which I would say we oftentimes overlook in the development of who we are in Christian life. This is my argument anyway, is that the questions that I kind of scroll through is, who am I? Who do I want to be? And what is, if there's something that I do or that I choose not to do or whatever, what will give my life fulfillment, wholeness, fullness? These are the kinds of words, and these are kind of the words in the space that I'm looking for. Not just scattered pieces, but what things as they come together are not just good or bad, not just, am I a good person or a bad person, but who am I becoming that is not just a joy to my own self, but actually makes the world a better place. I mean, I truly believe that when like I even say this to my partner, I'm like, man, who are you? Like, I love you. Like, I get my eyebrows go up, and I am just watching the greatest show on earth when I see somebody I love, like my partner, discover something about themselves, do their job like amazingly well. Like, I love watching them succeed. I love just watching them just fly. Just fly in the world. That's the joy in my life. And I think we sometimes don't realize that that's all, I don't need to be on stage to be good at music. That's great if that happens, but that's not what I'm achieving. Like, I want to participate in the things and figure out the things in me that are enriching to me, that help me be whole. And when I do those things and connect with other people or share that gift with other people, I mean, I think that's something that we mean when we talk about the gifts that we have. I mean, this is something that comes from that Christianity contends with. Like, what is your gift? You are made. There's something that you offer all of us that we need, and not just need, but we can celebrate with. That makes our garden grow. We may not have corn in the garden or tomatoes without you. So where are you? Where are you? Because we wait for you. But also, I know that when I say that, there's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of your gifts in easy ways. Like, we miss you because, we miss each other when we're not coming to the table. Or if you miss me when I'm not healthy and well, if I'm healed and I'm not broken and my legs broke, and I need somebody to care for me, I'm not probably logging a lot of miles, right? I'm probably needing to be cared for and resting. People are probably serving me and giving and gifting to me a lot more than I'm maybe perhaps, gifting and giving out at the time. So that interdependence becomes really visible when we actually do put healing onto the table. It gives us permission to go, I am not in, again, there's the not word. I am not in a position to be adding to the community right now. But the question for me that goes along, that partners with that, is, if you are not, then what will allow you to be? And if there's an impingement, if there's a healing that needs to happen, that might be a reason why you're not participating. If you're not prepared to go do it because you haven't practiced, you don't know what you're doing, then maybe learning and practice and growth and knowledge gaining is what you need to be doing to get into that space. What do you want to do? What do you not want to do? You're like, I don't want to do that. Never going to do it. Like, and if you know, maybe you have an internal knowing. Like for me as a musician, I'm always Jonah. I always have a Jonah relationship with me and music sometimes. Like I like music and I'm happy to keep it to myself, but it is also, in weirdly speaking, a calling in my life. I don't have to do it. I don't have to be in public. And at any given time, I feel like, it'll be fine. The world won't be disrupted if I disappear. But also like there are people who are asking me to come play. And it is an option that I have to say, I can do that. I really do want to do that. And to be able to get myself prepared to be able to do that is something that I've really figured out how to do that. And sometimes I just don't have enough bandwidth. Sometimes I need to go home and rest because I really want to do that now. Like now, I think years later, 25 plus years into this, and I think this is a distinction between sometimes the way my Christian narrative was, which is, as a musician, I was like obligated to do this work. I was obligated to sing. I was obligated to be the best representation of Jesus and a Christian that I possibly could be. But now I'm like, it's not an obligation anymore. It is a choice. It is something that I'm fascinated with how as I get to kind of know what my tradition has taught me, know who I am with inside of that tradition and know who I am in myself, how amazed I am of what a gift, and strangely how I would argue that I probably have way more of a ministry now, or way more service and a sharing and a connection with my community they ever had when it was mandatory, when I was supposed to show up, be on time, and be a representation of something that wasn't. I was pretending and putting on not that I was always authentic in what I was doing, but it's sort of like going, you always have to put on the hairdress and makeup and the pantyhose in order for somebody to take you seriously. And I can know now that I can bring all of those things to the table without having to dress it up, without all of the other work that tells you that you're going to take me seriously, because I know and I trust in the work and the volunteerism that I have and my participation in something that I know. If I'm writing a song at home now, it cannot wait to find the ears of who it's waiting for. Like that song goes, oh, I know exactly where I'm going to go. And I'm like, all right, let me be engaged in that. It's part of the joy. So that's one of the huge shifts. I think, even in this wider picture of deconstruction, or when we all kind of figure out is what is our relationship to the church and what is willful for us to be here. And if Christianity still has that to offer you, then do the hard work. It's a lot of hard work to prepare yourself to ask that question, but it's also a really rewarding one that will, happen privately, and it will kind of, I don't know, I think in real time, like eventually it will seek out other people. So the only question is whether or not you will permit it to, or give it permission to, I think, in the long run.
Yeah. It's really good.
So if what I'm about to do seems triggering or forced, someone's badgering me into doing it, I don't have to do it. Whether that's reading the Bible or go to church or listen to Christian music or whatever. But also what I'm hearing you say is you need to ask the question, why, right? Why can't I? Why am I not? Or, is there a reason? And for me, that's been a lot of internal work that had to be done. Why am I triggered?
Yeah.
Why is this a deal for me? And I could go back to church now, but they would probably kick me out because I would ask way more questions, and I would not just be, a slave to the doing, like we talked about earlier, and so on.
Well, and I love all those questions. I mean, those are a lot of questions, right? And I think I was thinking of one in there too. Is like when you were talking about the Bible, I thought, why do I have to read my Bible? And I would say you don't. but also like
Right.
it is a very informative piece of the pool of wisdom of other people.
Right.
But like, I think our answers will change over time. Like those kinds of questions that we ask, like I go back, I'm surprised every once in a while. I don't read my Bible in the same way, and I read it for a variety of different things. But like, if I'm not like, I'm just always kind of going, well, why would this benefit me if I did it? You know, I think those are also the questions. And why would it benefit me to go back to church? That might be a question that, you know, somebody in this space might ask. And if there are some things on that list going, even if your answer is, well, I'm not ready or I don't want to, that's still your answer. I mean, but to keep asking yourself that question, like maybe 10 years from now, 5 years from now, like to not just go think that anytime that we answer or attend to any one of these questions that we'll have the answer for all time. They will inform us as we go along the way. But I mean, every once in a while I'm like, oh, I'm not writing, you know, I'm not reading anything deeply spiritual right now. And I am actually, but like maybe that's the case. And I may go, oh, well, I don't sit here and say to myself, oh, I have to make sure that I always have a deeply spiritual book on my reading list, or I'm actively participating. Like all those things that are supposed to maintain this idea, that's an old school of Christian thought. If you don't do these things, then you're not doing this other things. But asking ourselves, like, those questions that are like, what would allow me to flourish right now? What am I missing? Am I missing anything? If I participate in this thing, I think I might be missing going to church. Maybe you might. So go to a church. And if that's not working for you, then don't. But, you know, I would say just never think that you've answered that question for all time. Like, I'm never going to go back to a church again. This is a toxic environment. Not all churches are toxic. Not all communities are churches. Not all church is an institution. So our flexibility with this and our ability to be creative in that and kind of do the hard work of going through that is all a long journey, and those things will change over time as you know, all of us have experienced, I think. And I think giving ourselves a little bit of grace inside of that to understand that you know, that's the case, that we don't always have the set answers, but we're working on our own knowing. I love where that goes, at least for me in my own experience. That's where I prefer to live.
Yeah, I feel like I can relate to that pretty deeply. So we like to ask this question of people who come on our podcast, and we never do prepare anybody for it, but we always like to ask, if you had a billboard that you know, could put up anywhere and it would reach lots and lots of people, what would you put on that billboard? And it can be anything. I mean, it can be as long as you want, as short as you want, doesn't matter. But if you had a billboard, what would your message?
I instantly saw love. Just do it.
I love
do
that.
It.
Yeah.
Like the best, I think all the money I've spent in therapy over my life, one of my therapists at some point, just, I'm a very argumentative, and I like to be understood, as if you couldn't tell. And I love to talk, but my therapist, in telling me to like not argue and get into fights about some things, she's like, just don't. But like, that was the best kind of advice I feel like I ever got. Every once in a while, where I'm just like, if there's something I do or I don't want to do, like, I'm either going to just do it or just don't. But yeah, and all the things that I could say in and around love and religion and all the other stuff, for me, love is just, it's just the one thing that I do whenever I'm you know, it's just the one thing that I labor to be good at, and the labor to do without hesitation. And it is the one thing I feel like I'm honest in saying I've never regretted any time I've just done that. Just kind of empty my mind of all other things and just participate in watering and flourishing and the celebrating and the liberation of any other thing that I can see or witness. And even if that it's myself, but love, just do it. It sounds easy.
That was one thing.
Sounds easy, but hard to do. But yeah, love, just do it.
It is, because we do put a lot of stipulations on what love actually looks like, and how that actually plays out. But that was one thing that I said to Carl after this weekend at the Pride Parade and festivities was, because I love to just people watch. I love to just see what's going on around me. And just like somehow I'm a part of that if I can just like see and experience other people. And that is the one thing that I will say that just really stood out to me is just the amount of celebration and love that was there. And it just didn't feel like it was work. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just felt so authentic, and so I really like that is what stood out to me.
Yeah, like the counter. I think sometimes, a lot of time, pride is understood. I think we're shifting. Actually, I think pride parades and LGBTQ visibility of that magnitude, like 25, 30 years ago, was tilted toward the side of protest and a demand to be heard, like an opening of the door, like of, you have to see us. If you don't see us, we don't exist, like kind of what we've been talking about. And you're talking about like, that's work. The protest of our visibility, like to have to like, to always break through a wall, to always, elevate our voices or turn the volume up. And that's a lot different level. That's a lot different kind of energy to go through a wall than to, be invited and celebrated and to go through a jungle, right? That you're constantly having to wield the machete to get your path. But the path is there already. So now we're being able to go down the path and get to where we're going. Like connect to the people that we love, connect to the churches, connect to the community. You get to see CPAs and not just the protest of, it is not that anymore. And I think that's the joy that I've had especially over the last 10 years as well, like to seeing you can feel it. Like that's the weird thing. Once you connect and you go and hang out with the people, it's not a protest anymore. Like the energy that is there is absolute joy. It is the collective community experience. It's not just gay people lining the streets. It is the cities, the cities and the communities of themselves going, thank you. Thank you to the queer community for showing us something about ourselves that we didn't know.
Right.
And anytime you're talking to a marginalized people who have worked so hard to machete through the jungle of their own knowing, they have a truth that isn't just about queer truth. It is about our human truth.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Amen.
If it is a truth about what our faith has taught us, it is not just a Christian truth. It is it is a divine truth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is so weird because, these are the contests that we are kind of in the deconstruction mode, kind of giving up. We're moving from a truth that has a capital T on it that says, you can't be a member of this church unless you confess Jesus, Lord, your Savior, because there's a truth that happens when you can make a confession, or that you have to sign off that there were 2x2 animals on the ark and that the flood happened. And this is a capital T historic truth. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the truth of who we are. We're talking about the truth of being. To me, and this is where for me, it always kind of goes into this amazing space of divinity, of sacredness, that it transcends all of our imaginations of captivity. It's not just a truth that works for queer people. It's a truth about our being and our lives and our existence and our being and our spirit that you don't have to be queer to absolutely recognize. But a queer community may be able to paint that picture, may be able to be the songwriter, right? That puts it into view for the rest of us that we couldn't see.
That's right. Yeah.
So the question I always have for you is, what is the thing that you see? What is the song that you will write? I don't just mean the song, right? But what is a truth that you have that is uniquely yours, that the rest, that you will pave a way to celebrate all of us, make the path a wider path that we're all on. So yeah, I love it. And it is a weird thing, you know, but I contend with it every day, but it gets me super excited, as you can tell. Yeah. It's a real joy. And I'm really grateful to see like communities everywhere I go. The spirit of those Pride festivals is one example of the kind of hospitality that the knowing work, the work of knowing and the labor that LGBTQ community has done and has braved sharing us. You know, instead of a world that said, we demand that you stay in your closet. We don't want to know you. And a community that said, but I will let you know me and I will suffer through until you realize what a joy it will be. Ugh. You know, that is a labor of work that we all have the opportunity to do. Yeah. And when to me, like it is utterly bound up in our Christianity. Like Christianity has something to say about that. And I feel like that's the real revelation somewhere in there of something that, you know, at the end of the day, love, just do it. Just get to know and share. It will make the world, I really do believe it will make the world a better place. And none of us own it, strangely enough, but we all get invited.
That was one of the things that Derek said that really struck me is he was just like, you know, Christianity, I believe, or the church doesn't have a corner market on things like love. Like,
nope.
So I love that you just said that. Like,
yeah. In fact, when I sit up in the second row of the arena and looked out on the floor at the celebration, at the evening celebration, what was more apt to come out of my mouth at that point is what they used to say about Christians. Look how they love each other.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, it's like something you sense and you feel when you're there.
Yeah,
that's really hard to explain.
And the beautiful thing to me too, and the sadly beautiful thing is, like, as a heterosexual couple, we never felt like we didn't belong there, and how often,
the opposite.
You know, the opposite happens where. We aren't accepting and we aren't welcoming.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful thing that we were allowed to be who we are and be there in this space.
And perhaps receive the gift that parade was perhaps maybe for you on that day to enjoy it.
You betcha.
Absolutely.
So Jennifer, where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest place to go is .com. So www.jenniferknapp.com. I'm doing a lot of things in the world right now. Obviously, you know, I'm doing shows, and I've got a Patreon thing that I'm quite interactive with on a monthly basis. I do live shows on there. I'm now doing a thing called Faith Exchange. So a group of us get together and kind of basically do this, where, you know, I do an online social hour every month. So I just get together with a bunch of people. We just hang out and then some. So, but at the end of the day, if you go by jenniferknapp.com, you'll be able to see everything that's happening. And if there are any left, that's even got the store. So we've got some Kansas 25 vinyl that are we've only got a few. I think we're literally down to just a few left. So if by the time this airs, we may not have any, but anything that we have at all to offer or to give you news, it'll be there.
Okay. Sounds good. For the listeners out there, we thank you for tuning in. What a great, for me to listen to, just to sit back and hear the wise words.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
We thank you for tuning in. As always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.